Let me introduce myself. I am Lewis Potter, although most of my friends affectionately call me Lou. To tell the truth, I tend to respond to almost any name thrown in my direction. I am happily married to a wonderful woman named Ruby, and for 4 years now, we have been on a blissful marital journey together. But we deliberately decided not to have children, guided by a slight sense of self-suggestion and a desire to preserve our cherished freedom. Despite this, the probability that we will become parents remains, but I assume that this will happen when we gracefully step over the 30-year mark. It is worth noting that both Ruby and I come from modest families who grew up a few blocks from each other in poor neighborhoods. We first crossed paths when, at the age of 18, we both attended a recruitment event organized by our college. Ruby studied well and successfully pursued a career as an accountant and credit controller. On the other hand, my college career was far from stellar. I had academic difficulties and was unable to graduate, but I had a strong work ethic and a natural aptitude for business. At the tender age of 15, I began my professional career as a cleaner in local shops and small offices. By the age of 18, I had already created a team of 30 employees and signed contracts with several well-known enterprises in our city. Ruby was looking for a job, and I needed new employees. During one of the events, Ruby came over to my table, and we struck up a conversation. Along with her resume, she amusingly remarked, "I'm not looking for a cleaning job, but you might be interested to know my phone number." Impressed, I wasted no time calling her even before she settled at the next table and invited her to have dinner with me the next evening. We had no idea that this meeting would lead to an incredible journey. 4 years have passed, and we are happily married. In addition, this happy event led to positive changes in Ruby's career. She started working in the purchasing department of a reputable engineering firm, starting at the bottom of the ladder. My wife worked her way up the career ladder for 8 years, eventually reaching the honorary position of head of the purchasing and credit control department. When we didn't have to take care of children, our double-income lifestyle flourished, allowing us to enjoy a comfortable existence. At the same time, my own business was booming, as a result of which I acquired 2 of my competitors and founded the largest office and store cleaning company in the entire city. Cleaners and security guards are often the first to encounter unusual phenomena in the workplace, which sparks conversations among employees who are always willing to share their thoughts on this matter. About 4 months ago, when I was diligently doing my job in the office, my secretary unexpectedly visited me. She informed me that there was a gentleman waiting patiently in the waiting room who wanted to engage in conversation with me. Intrigued, she handed me a business card with the name Ross Evans, private investigator. Having decided to find out the purpose of his visit, I instructed my secretary to escort him to my office. As soon as he crossed the threshold, I immediately got up from my seat and held out my hand in a polite gesture. In a polite tone, I asked Mr. Evans, "What can I do for you?" Our hands met in a firm handshake, and I cordially invited him to take a seat in the office. Smiling, he sat down in an armchair and expressed a desire to have a cup of coffee. It was obvious that he had been deprived of it all day and had a strong craving for it. I could sympathize with his feelings, as caffeine is usually a necessity for many people in the business world. Sensing his need, my secretary quickly took the initiative and poured 2 mugs of steaming coffee from the office vending machine, putting them on the table along with milk and sugar. But none of us reached out to them yet. Having started a casual conversation, I turned my attention to the main purpose of our meeting. Addressing him as Mr. Evans, I asked him what I could do for him. He immediately introduced himself as Ross, calling for speed. Showing a business card, he said that he was a private investigator hired by a concerned client who suspected infidelity or impending infidelity of his wife. Our focus is on a man named Ward, who works as an accountant for Stevens Piping. An important supplier for this company is AM Metals, which recently hired a salesman named Alistair Clark. It is worth noting that Mr. Clark enjoys a reputation as a seducer, especially among married women. Clark has been actively stalking my client's wife for quite some time. Their communication includes long lunch dates, flower deliveries, and text messages sent late at night. Apparently, Clark is trying to convince her to join him for an overnight trip. We have gathered enough evidence to confirm this, but there are still a few details that need to be clarified. I must admit that the situation intrigued me very much. The concept of an undercover agent is quite amusing, and the name Amidal evokes a familiar response in me. And this Clark seems to be someone I should stay away from. I looked up and noticed that Ross's gaze was fixed on me. Obviously, he was patiently waiting for the question. Taking advantage of the opportunity, I asked, "I understand the situation, but how can I help?" A smile appeared on his lips. "I expected you to be curious about this matter." "Everything is very simple," he said. He puts flowers, notes, and various papers on her desk. She schemes through them and then throws them away. Your employees are getting rid of the garbage. Our legal service has confirmed that it is possible to take all his personal belongings from him and transfer them to us without encountering any legal obstacles. In addition, we have received permission from our employer to access relevant information. By cooperating with our investigation, they will be able to avoid any legal problems related to the violation of the fraternity clause in our contract. If you need further clarification as to why they agreed to this agreement, we have attached the CEO's business card for reference. Please contact him to confirm your consent. The CEO's number was already recorded in my phone. Without saying a word to Ross, I quickly grabbed the phone and dialed his number. He picked up the phone on the second ring and, without any greeting, quickly exclaimed, "Lou, I think Ross Evans is in your office. I confirm that I grant you the full right to share with him or his employees any non-confidential information that is not related to our company. My lawyer is currently preparing a letter on this issue, which we will immediately send you by email." Unfortunately, I have to interrupt our conversation because the lawyer has already arrived at my office. But please feel free to contact him if you need any additional help. With that, he abruptly ended the conversation, leaving me no opportunity to respond. It was clear that they wanted to resolve this issue as soon as possible. Ross smiled at me, to which I simply nodded and added, "He confirmed your words. Please provide me with all the necessary information, and I will start sorting your trash, putting it in a separate bag. Here, can you pick it up every morning at 11 o'clock? Will that suit you?" Ross asked for confirmation. "It's definitely the perfect option," Ross replied. He then contacted the team leader and provided us with detailed instructions on what to observe, early or late dinners, availability of flowers, written notes, and so on. Our collaboration with Ross lasted about 6 weeks. In the end, he informed us that the investigation was completed. But one of my employees noticed that one of the employees did not return after lunch. We informed Ross of this without delay. He followed them until they got to the motel. In the end, their marriage broke up and ended in a bitter divorce. Life continued to go on as usual, organically combining work and family responsibilities. But the day came when Ruby returned home with a note of concern. Worried, I tried to find out the reason for her concern, but she stubbornly remained silent and did not tell me anything. Then, about a week later, Donna, a reliable employee who had worked with me since the beginning of my business, suddenly came to my office. She was not only a conscientious employee but also became a close friend. Being 25 years older than me, she always treated me with special care and affection, almost like a mother. When she settled into the chair, I was overcome by a feeling of anxiety, signaling that something was wrong. It was at this moment that she decided to talk about the memories that remained in her memory. A few months before, when we both worked in the same office, diligently tracking the activities of one woman, the memory made me curious, and I couldn't understand how such an event could have slipped my mind. I asked, raising an eyebrow to show my sincere intrigue, "Why is this memory surfacing right now?" She hesitated, her words hanging in the air. "As you may know, I am currently working in the same office as your wife. Interestingly, the person we were watching earlier has now started visiting her office. I happened to notice a large bouquet of flowers that she took with her for lunch. Curiosity got the better of her, and she handed me an accompanying postcard. It read, 'Dear Ruby, I want to express my deepest gratitude to you for your invaluable help in extending my contract with your company. I can't fully express how grateful I am for your support. I would be glad if you would join me for lunch, as I think this will give us the opportunity to have a meaningful conversation. Love, Alice.'" A chill ran through my body as I read the words on the card. It was clear from the words that this was not their first meeting, and it seemed that she was dangerously close to not passing the loyalty test. Ross warned me about this guy, about how he was making his way into married women's lives with great success. My heart sank at the thought that my wife might fall under his influence. I expressed my gratitude to Donna and asked her to keep a vigilant eye on everything else, providing me with daily summaries. I asked her to bring additional notes if any. As soon as she left, I quickly grabbed the phone and dialed Ross's number. He answered after the third call, greeting me with the words, "Hi Lou, how can I help you?" Without delay, I started the conversation by passing on the information that Donna had shared. A recent visit by one of my employees caught my attention. This person was responsible for clearing the table every evening during the case you entered after the investigation was completed. We transferred her to another position. She currently works in the same office as my wife. Donna recently informed me that Mr. Clark, who we were investigating, is now putting pressure on my wife and even inviting her to lunch. I have a postcard decorated with flowers sent by Mr. Clark himself where he expresses his wishes. Ross paused, taking a deep breath. We continue to search for the truth about Mr. Clark, and surprisingly, you are already the third husband entangled in this web. But the difference between them is that the previous two husbands did not know about his true identity from the very beginning. The other husbands have come to an agreement on cost sharing. Would you be interested in joining them? Absolutely. What are the necessary steps? I asked. Ross informed me that he would have a meeting with the other husbands at 2 o'clock and asked if I could come to his office to meet, fill out the necessary paperwork, and exchange information. I readily agreed to his request. I found myself in Ross's office at exactly 1:55 p.m., accompanied by two husbands named Dan McWilliams and Johnny Ashley. We were joined by Ross and his employee Mike Pearson, who was diligently collecting data for this particular case. After starting the meeting, Ross addressed us as gentlemen, stating that the purpose of our meeting was due to the fact that the three of us were in the same difficult situation. After drawing attention to Dan and Johnny, Ross introduced me to them as a potential addition to our investigation and asked if they agreed with this proposal. We registered him as a client and prepared the necessary documents for the exchange of information. Both men looked at me and then at Ross, expressing their agreement with the plan. The paperwork took about 15 minutes, after which I used my personal credit card to make an advanced payment of $5,000. I knew Ruby would never be notified of this deal. Ross then started the conversation by touching on our common problem related to Mr. Alistair Clark, which involved Dan, Johnny, and me. For your information, Lou, Dan's wife works at AM Metals, with Mr. Clark. On the other hand, Johnny's wife works for the school board, which buys metals for technology classes in schools. Unfortunately, Mr. Clark behaves inappropriately with women at work and repeats himself all the time. He constantly harasses them, offering flowers, sending messages, sharing grievances, and often tries to persuade them to go to a motel after dinner. This behavior is not limited to women with children, as he also tries to have an intimate relationship with childless women. He is trying to manipulate them by getting permission from their husbands for a special privilege. He seems to take great pleasure in knowing that the husbands of these women know about his ability to win the favor of their wives. He lures them away for the weekends so he can leave them. We found out that in the last year alone, this man has caused at least 5 divorces in the area. Our investigation led us to his previous place of work located in Dallas. Interestingly, he was fired from his position after husbands filed a class action lawsuit against him over 3 years, accusing him of alienating affection. This man is absolutely disgusting. After taking another sip of coffee, he continued to ask, "Lou, are you cleaning at AM Metals or at the school district office? As far as we know, if you throw garbage in a bag, you can use it at your discretion unless your contract with the company you contracted to clean does not specify confidentiality conditions." I shook my head in response, denying any involvement in these places. Ross nodded understandingly. "This is unfortunate, but please keep picking up the trash in your wife's basket," he remarked. Curiously, he asked, "Who covers your wife's phone expenses?" Without hesitation, I answered, "This responsibility lies with my business." A smile played on Ross's lips. "Can I get her phone number?" I clarified, "This is a Samsung device, so you know." "Great," he replied. "Could you fill out this document giving us permission to access data from her phone?" Handing me a paper with a QR code, he explained. Scan this code with your phone, and you will be taken to our server. Using the provided username and password, a program will be installed on her mobile phone that allows us to intercept and track all her calls, messages, emails, and even WhatsApp conversations. It is worth noting that she intentionally uses a mobile phone so that her husband does not mistakenly answer calls from their home phone. After the meeting, Dan, Johnny, and I exchanged phone numbers and then created a WhatsApp group that included Ross and Mike. This approach facilitated the rapid exchange of information between us. When I got home, I found Ruby's presence, but she looked preoccupied again, clutching the phone tightly and showing no interest in my words. It was curious that she went outside to feed our dog, taking her phone with her. I had not observed such behavior before. Concerned, I asked her how she was feeling, to which she replied that the day had been unusual and she felt very tired. Unusually, she went to bed at 9:30 p.m., a full 2 hours earlier than usual. I didn't sleep until our usual time, and then I went in search of her phone, but it wasn't in its usual place. So I went up to our bedroom. To my surprise, I noticed a telephone cable next to the bed, hidden under the pillow. Removing it without disturbing her sleep proved to be an insurmountable task, and I was forced to return to bed. The whole situation was alarming, and it was difficult for me to find restful sleep. Fortunately, luck was on my side. She got up and left the room in the dark. Taking advantage of the opportunity, I quickly took possession of her phone. After scanning the QR code and entering the necessary information, I carefully put the phone back in its original place and left. The next morning, she wandered aimlessly around the house until it was time for her to go to work. It was only when I started a conversation with her that she shared at least some information. Around 11:30 a.m., a call came in from Mike, who was in Ross's office. They finished analyzing the initial data package, and he had to start explaining the results. She created a new email address solely for his use. I want to add that this situation is incredibly beneficial for us. Initially unaware of how he communicates with women, we are currently engaged in hacking his email. There is a strong persuasive tone in his messages, prompting her to emphasize that you are her only and original partner. In addition, he advised her to look for new ways to keep a bright and exciting marriage. Unfortunately, she divulged very personal details of your life, which he shrewdly perceived and used to his advantage. He subtly hinted that new intimate contacts will bring variety to your relationship. During yesterday's lunch, he had already hinted at spending the weekend together, but now he is trying to justify it by saying that it is solely about engaging in intimacy. I discussed her behavior last night and suggested that she must have been preoccupied with it all night. In the morning, she didn't even acknowledge my presence. In the end, I asked if they were in touch or if they were planning another lunch. Mike looked through the messages, stopping at the very last one. It offered to meet for lunch at the beach club the next day and discuss plans for the future. The message also spoke of affection for me and emphasized that if she confided in him, it would not be considered treason, and he would give her the opportunity to freely choose. I replied with a simple okay. When Mike and I finished our conversation, I leaned back in my chair, considering my next steps. Just talking to her wasn't enough. He will persist in his attempts and look for other ways to win her over. Taking her to a motel for half a day is no longer an option. I realized that I had to put an end to this situation or risk the collapse of our marriage. I contacted Ross and, after exchanging pleasantries, told him about my intention to pursue Ruby and flaunt her in front of me. Even if I manage to stop it for a while, I know that he will try to take her to a motel. It is extremely important for me to develop a plan to finally end this affair. I believe that filing for divorce is necessary, but I also need to develop a backup plan. Although I have not yet decided what it should be. What do you think about this? After a short pause, Ross finally broke the silence, acknowledging that it was important to have a backup plan but stressing that failure would not stop him. He was firmly convinced that this man's ego would not allow him to let her go so easily. Therefore, if forgiveness is out of the question, divorce will inevitably become a reality at some point. Taking the initiative, I suggested drawing up a package of documents for their lawyer or, alternatively, offering a reliable one of my own. But Ross objected, saying he already had his own legal arrangements. Then I mentioned the existence of a business agreement that would be protected by a divorce trust. I called my lawyer and asked for an urgent meeting. We made an appointment for the next morning at 9:30 a.m. When I entered his office, the lawyer glanced in my direction, annoyed. I couldn't help but wonder who had interfered with my plans. A smile appeared on my face when I realized that he saw right through me. I sat down in an armchair and took a cup of coffee thoughtfully placed in front of me by his secretary. Then I started talking. Ruby is planning to betray me. A convincing salesman entered her workplace and managed to capture her attention. Unfortunately, she fell for his tricks, and I have no choice but to seek legal help. I am currently developing a backup plan to stop everything, since my original plan, designated as Plan A, will turn out to be fraudulent in the event of my spouse's infidelity. We spent the next hour exploring various potential alternatives. My main goal was to achieve a smooth and amicable divorce. According to our agreement, the business is protected, and all other property will be divided equally. Since there are no children, alimony is not needed. Besides, we decided to sell the house. Suing Clark, his employer, or her employer was not my intention. Such actions would be prohibitively expensive and unlikely to lead to a favorable outcome. In the end, we sealed our agreement with a handshake. I made the payment and left. He will handle all the paperwork and will keep them in the archive so that I can contact him if necessary. Throughout the week, Ruby's emotions changed. One evening she showered me with caresses, and the other, she seemed completely oblivious to my existence. On Friday afternoon, Donna informed me that Ruby had received a substantial bouquet of flowers accompanied by a postcard with the inscription. Looking closer, I found that Ross had shared the following message. He invited her to dinner at the Holiday Inn. Then I sent a message to the group, informing Mike about the colors and passing on the contents of the accompanying postcard. I just checked her email, but there was nothing there yet. This morning, he replied. Shortly after that, Mike called and, without interrupting the conversation, asked me to look into his WhatsApp. Following his advice, I went into the app and found the document that Mike had sent me. When I opened it, I realized that it was a confirmation of booking a room at a hotel located by a picturesque lake about 30 miles from the city. The reservation listed a double room for the upcoming Friday and Saturday in the names of Clark and Ruby. I went back to the phone and reported my findings, saying, "Things don't seem to be going well." Mike sighed. In fact, the letter is even more alarming. This is a comprehensive guide to cheating written by Ruby. I'll forward it to you. I expressed my gratitude, and we ended the conversation. Later, a letter came, and I started reading it. All the letters were headed weekend and had been coming in a row for the past few weeks. It all started with the fact that he shared with her a link to the hotel, which he eventually booked for himself. In the letter, he described in detail his desire to pamper her, to take her to a hotel to pamper her. In previous letters, he expressed his curiosity about her views on alternative forms of entertainment and wondered why I had deprived her of the opportunity to do something that brought her joy. In his last letter, he touched on the topic of table reservations and even provided a detailed list of offers, trying to manipulate her into betraying her own desires. This included preparing a gourmet dinner for Thursday and frequent intimate meetings during the week. Only later, I clarified that this would be an exclusively physical relationship without an emotional connection. At the same time, he could pass on a lot of knowledge to her. Before our marriage, I had much more experience. He finished the phrase, "If you really love me," although her answer was evasive. The decision ended up in her hands. I'm not sure Lou will believe this, so I need time to reflect. The weekend was consumed by hard work. I couldn't say what I understood, but she showed boundless kindness. We did intimate things on Friday night, Saturday morning, and Saturday night. On Sunday, at the height of daylight, she brought me back to bed. In the evening, after that, on Monday morning, we entered into a brief intimate relationship. At exactly 3 o'clock on Monday, Ross got in touch to report unpleasant news regarding email. In response, she immediately texted Clark, expressing her intention to deliver it to you on Thursday evening. If you refuse, she will not continue, but if you agree, she will act accordingly. He replied, advising that if you start to worry, remember that asking for forgiveness is often easier than asking for permission. Thanking Ross, I asked him to put together a complete folder with all our materials. In response, I asked if there were photos of them at the moment of solitude. Under the noise of paper shifting, he announced the existence of a picture of them kissing, although not very intensely. Having accepted this, I replied, "Okay, please put everything in a folder and let this photo serve as the cover page on the outside. Also, kindly send the entire folder to my lawyer." After assuring me, he confirmed that he would perform all the necessary actions for sending. I dialed my lawyer's number and initiated a follow-up call with caution. I informed him of the upcoming case and informed him that he would receive the dossier in due course. We have come to a mutual agreement that it will be presented at the hotel during the morning breakfast on Saturday. Just the thought of asking for a divorce disrupts digestion. On Monday evening, she wanted intimacy, but I refused, citing an urgent matter that needed to be completed. Sitting in my office, I diligently performed my duties. It wasn't until 2 o'clock in the morning that I finally went to bed. By that time, she had already fallen into a deep sleep. I also fell into a peaceful sleep, waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning before she could launch an attack. I quickly got to work. The courier delivered the folder, and I was already sitting in the office eagerly examining its contents. The seductive nature of the technique used was unmistakable. She had an unpredictable personality, but she was undeniably effective in her endeavors. In the folder, Ross described in detail, although he hid the names, at least 7 marriages that he had personally destroyed over the past 18 months. Besides, there was a note from Dan waiting for me in the folder. It announced his arrival at the Holiday Inn, where he joined his wife and Clark at the table. Unfortunately, his wife's frustration became insurmountable, and she left the restaurant in a cascade of tears. Ross was forced to intervene to prevent Dan from attacking Clark and subsequently offered him a ride home. Worried about their marriage and the fact that they have 3 young children, Ross and his wife decided to see a psychologist in the hope of saving their relationship. This temporary solution will help them by some time, especially since his wife quit her job, leaving Clark idle. As I was immersed in reading, my secretary suddenly entered the room without saying a word. She met my gaze, overwhelmed with emotion. I suddenly burst into tears and told her the whole story. "What are you going to do now?" Surprisingly, a smile appeared on my face, which was the first time. It was mysterious, but at that moment, she turned from a simple secretary into a caring friend. Moreover, I realized something that I had not paid attention to before: she radiated undeniable attractiveness. Returning my smile, she replied, "I propose Plan A, divorce. If she goes with him on Friday, she will start divorce proceedings at the hotel on Saturday morning." No rethinking, I tried to come up with an alternative strategy to put an end to her actions, but my mind went blank and I couldn't come up with any ideas. Miss Atwood, my secretary, whom I usually called Miss Atwood but who preferred to be called Katie, grinned slightly and said, "What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Why not plan a weekend with a desirable woman?" Unable to resist, I smiled back and asked, who would be the ideal candidate for such an offer? I had already anticipated her reaction, but she decided to answer anyway, keeping up with me. "Since your reliable secretary continues to harass you, it is necessary to put these thoughts out of your head. Rest assured, our communication will be exclusively intimate and will not be related to your marriage. Consider this letter as a guide to action to express your feelings before she has a chance to confront you." The letter is remarkably simple and, at the same time, forces Ruby to admit that she herself committed the betrayal. On Tuesday evening, I entered into an intimate relationship with my wife, devoid of any love. It was undoubtedly a difficult experience. None of us were ready for a spontaneous meeting. On Wednesday morning, as the day progressed into Wednesday evening, the atmosphere remained slightly tense, albeit with a slight improvement. The next Thursday morning, Ruby woke up just as I was about to leave the house. She urgently mentioned some kind of dinner, but I deliberately chose to ignore her remark. Around noon of the same day, Ross called me and informed me that Ruby had written to Clark, saying that she intended to prepare a grand celebration for me and would inform him of the results of our conversation. Trying to anticipate her needs, I decided to act. I quickly went to the store, bought chicken, potatoes, and vegetables, intending to bake them. I also brought a bottle of her favorite white wine. By 2:30, I had already returned home, and 2 hours later, everything was ready and put in the oven. When I was about to put the potatoes in, Ruby suddenly came into the house with shopping bags. Confusion flashed across her face as she looked at me and asked, "What's going on?" In response, a big smile spread across my face. I intended to create an unforgettable moment, but before we got down to business, we needed to talk. As I watched her face, an unusual expression appeared on it, indicating her surprise. "Eyes," she replied, clearly stunned. "I was planning to cook dinner, but once we're done, we can discuss something important that I have to share." Realizing that the evening would drag on, I replied, "Of course, it looks like it," although with a smile on my face. I have already played an important role in her plans. When we sat down to dinner, the atmosphere became tense. I continued the conversation, and whenever she seemed to want to turn her attention to me, I subtly interrupted her, suggesting that we enjoy our delicious dish first. I promised to share my important news after that. As soon as we finished the meal, I took the initiative. "Why don't you bring the wine to the kitchen, and we can continue our conversation there?" I suggested. She obediently followed me. Earlier, I had thoughtfully placed a folder hidden under several magazines on the kitchen table. There was a letter in this folder which carefully outlined all her excuses. I put the magazines out of sight, giving her the opportunity to notice only the printed materials that I held in my hands. I spoke sincerely to Ruby, assuring her of my unwavering love and that I would never harm her. But we tied the knot at a young age, leaving me with limited life experience. Lately, my new secretary, Miss Atwood, or Katie as she prefers to be called, has been engaging me in conversations. The abundance of her fascinating stories can captivate me for several hours before we start fulfilling our lifelong commitments. I feel the need to erase her from my thoughts. I have arranged to spend the weekend with her at the hotel, where our meeting will consist solely of physical intimacy and a small amount of my time. For me, this is just a way to relieve tension and get to know new sensations that we can later incorporate into our intimate moments. It is very important for you to understand that this does not diminish my love for you and will not affect our marriage in any way. I'm telling you this in advance to ensure transparency and prevent feelings of betrayal from arising. I know about your deep love for me, so I believe that you will understand and support my desire to spend this upcoming weekend outside of our marriage. Please know that this decision will not have any negative impact on our relationship." Ruby's face was flushed with anger, and it looked like she was about to explode. She stated firmly, "Under no circumstances will this happen. Moreover, if this person continues to be a part of our lives on Monday morning, we will have to reconsider our relationship." Such an unexpected response relieved the tension I was feeling, and I couldn't help but laugh uncontrollably. I exclaimed, "Just look at your expression. It is simply priceless." I couldn't have expected a better reaction. At the same moment, it dawned on her. Every word I said, she was going to reveal to me. I opened the folder and handed it to her. The cover featured a picture of her in a moment of intimacy with Clark. Her face was almost haggard as she whispered softly, "You were aware, but you still organized this deception of me." A grin appeared on my face. "Yes, I organized it. Your reaction is exactly the same as mine if you had caught me off guard. And just so you know, unlike you, I didn't book a hotel for our date. Unlike me, Miss Atwood and I have never dined together, kissed, or talked about our love or intimate life. The story I came up with is a figment of my imagination, whereas yours, on the contrary, is undoubtedly genuine." While I was saying these words, she was looking through the contents of the folder in her hands. The information contained in it seemed to surprise her as it revealed a complete picture of her life: dates, times, pictures of intimate dinners, copies of her confidential emails, and transcripts of private phone conversations. All of this has been carefully collected on these pages. She was fuming. "You've been following me, violating my personal boundaries. How could you stoop so low?" I kept calm. That's all this was, the moment when it was necessary to decide whether to act or not. I am deeply attached to this woman, but it is important for her to understand that there are boundaries, and she is now standing on the edge. You found yourself a boyfriend, started an emotional affair, started physical intimacy while shaming me and endangering our marriage, and now you have the nerve to be mad at me for trying to put an end to this. I believe that we could overcome this setback, but maybe I was wrong, I replied. There was more sadness in my tone than anger. What does it mean to disgrace you and ruin our marriage? I never wanted any of this to happen. This happened for a reason independent of our relationship. Obviously, she resorted to a quote from the infidelity manual. Why should this affect us? Think about your words. I repeated her words and realized that you responded in kind. You said it's not going to happen, so why is it acceptable for you to be unfaithful but not for me? When she took a deep breath as if preparing to speak, I instinctively raised my hand and intervened, reminding her that there are no free passes. The fact that she decided to go with Clark would undoubtedly be considered treason. Even if she had told about it in advance, it would not have changed the circumstances. Looking down, she muttered, "I can't stomach it right now. I need to be alone." With these last words, she abruptly rose from her seat and hurried up the stairs, clutching the folder tightly in her hands. The sound of the bedroom door closing and the subsequent click of the lock echoed through the house. After putting the house in order, I settled down at the table. Ross handed me a tablet computer, giving me access to a server that displayed Ruby's phone activity. I sat down in an armchair and eagerly opened the editor. To my surprise, I discovered her correspondence with Clark. Intrigued, I delved into her first message. Surprisingly, Alistair, he knows about us and had copies of our conversations. When I got home, I saw him diligently cooking dinner, at the same time revealing a disturbing revelation. He seemed to have an amazing ability to anticipate my thoughts. Just the thought of him having another woman caused an explosion of emotions in me. But my confusion was abruptly interrupted when he opened a folder containing indisputable evidence. Everything was carefully planned down to the smallest reservations. Stunned and not knowing what to do, she turned to Clark for advice. It was obvious that he did not perceive this as a serious problem, as his reply came a few minutes later. His advice was simple. He urged her to calmly inform me that all the preparations had already been made, emphasize her unwavering love, and ask if her feelings coincided with his. He hoped that I would understand the need for this weekend and realize that she really needs it. The desperation in those words was almost palpable. I tried, but he insisted that it would bring shame to him and ruin our marriage. Even if I had asked his permission, he would have regarded it as infidelity. I just can't get through this. I have to put an end to everything. Although it would be a pleasant weekend, I can't risk jeopardizing my future with Lou. Now, despair gripped him. All the time and money he had invested was wasted, and he had to make a bold decision. Is he going to divorce you? No, he will never find another woman like you. How about this? Pack your bag and bring it to work. Let's see how he reacts, and if it doesn't work out, let's plan a weekend trip. On Sunday, you can apologize and ask him for forgiveness. I know your husband well, and he would never want to lose you. It was all nonsense, but unfortunately, she fell for it. The last message in the chain was a simple good, but if there's even a hint that he might leave me, I won't do it. Let's meet tomorrow. She began to think more rationally. I had knowledge of how to calm her worries. I put the tablet away and sat down in front of the TV, but my attention was still divided as I reflected on the circumstances. I had originally planned to file for divorce on Saturday, but now I doubted that postponing it to a later date would be more appropriate. At the same time, I understood that as soon as I applied, there would be no turning back. No, I decided that tomorrow I would need to take a different approach to demonstrate my seriousness. I dialed my lawyer's number and told him all the details. I decided to tell her the whole truth. Clark informed her that I was ready to forgive her despite her intention to pack up and check my reaction. I decided not to file for divorce until they actually slept together, but I was wondering if there was a way to show her the seriousness of the situation. Fortunately, my lawyer came up with a smart solution. He offered to send her a letter with a preliminary claim. This letter would explicitly state that we are aware of her plans to engage in an illicit relationship over the weekend. It would also serve as a warning that if she continues this relationship, we will begin divorce proceedings immediately on Saturday morning right at the hotel. I suggest slightly refining the text and handing it to her in the office, ideally with Clark present. How do you feel about this plan? I am sure that it will be effective. Clark has been appointed as the main proof that I intend to act. She mentioned that Clark would pick her up during lunch. I think it would be best to present this to her around 11 o'clock, regardless of Clark's presence. Her employer will understand the situation. He holds conservative views and may not approve of her action. But what aspect do you think bothers him the most? If a buyer came to the office and made a scandal an hour after that, the lawyer sent me a sample letter. Everything about him was perfect for the circumstances. It listed everything we knew about, and it said quite clearly that the summons would be served on Saturday morning. In response, I sent a message confirming that I was satisfied with everything. After checking the tablet, I saw that there were no more messages between Ruby and Clark and went to bed. To my surprise, I soon discovered that the situation was far from what I had expected. When I entered the room, I found Ruby lying in bed, seemingly waiting for a romantic encounter. But my attention was immediately drawn to her bag, neatly propped against the wall on her side of the bed. Noticing this, I couldn't help but conclude that she had made a choice. A fleeting date with Clark prevailed over our sacred union. Overwhelmed with emotion, I quickly turned around and left the room, heading towards the guest quarters. As I was walking away, I heard Ruby hurriedly get out of bed, her voice echoing through the air, desperately begging me to stop and come back. "Lou, please," she cried, "this is all a terrible mistake. Let me prove the depth of our love." I didn't answer but just stayed lying on the bed, fully dressed. The letters, although not authentic, were written by someone else, not me. But the package, prepared and waiting for the presence of another person, was really tangible, causing strong emotions and piercing my heart like a sharp blade. I did not expect such sadness and a deep sense of emptiness, which caused me to shed tears all night. When morning came, I heard Ruby coming down the stairs in search of solace. I entered our bedroom, intending to take a shower and change into fresh clothes, and then I discovered that the bag had disappeared and was no longer in its original place. While I was thinking, I wondered if she had taken it downstairs, unpacked it, and hidden it. After getting out of the shower, I smelled the delicious aroma of coffee and bacon, which immediately hinted that the bag must have found its place downstairs. Intrigued, I walked into the kitchen and met her gaze. Her nervous gaze, accompanied by a bitten lower lip, caught my attention. At that moment, the thought occurred to me, don't hold back, she's obviously worried. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if this grand celebration wasn't just an attempt to show what a wonderful wife she could be, even if it meant being with another man. But deep down, I knew that such an approach would never succeed. If she decides to follow through, it will mark the end of our relationship. In the midst of our conversation, I made a firm decision. My lawyer and I have come to a mutual agreement that the divorce papers will be presented to you tomorrow morning during breakfast, I said. I want to emphasize that once they are transferred, there will be no way back or revision. Forgiveness is not up for discussion. But if you decide to return home tonight, we can start consultations to restore trust and prevent this situation from happening again. On the other hand, if you decide to leave with him, I want to make it clear that you will not be welcome here. When I was about to leave, she begged me to stay and join her for breakfast. We really need to deal with this situation, she pleaded. I turned to her and answered, we have already had a long conversation on this topic. Judging by your actions, you are more interested in convincing me than in an open dialogue. I'm not having breakfast here. It's high time you learn to be independent and take care of yourself. If you decide to do it, I guess the bag is already in your car. She looked away, confirming my assumption. I left the house in complete silence. At least she seemed to realize the danger she was in. When Katie arrived at the office, she looked at me and spoke, "You look very disconcerted." I couldn't help but smile. As always, you radiate undeniable attractiveness. For your information, I have no idea how it went when I suggested an alternative solution. She was furious. She expressed a desire to remove you from the business and even said that it would happen only through her lifeless body. After that, she began to behave independently. This morning, she packed her bag for the day off before leaving. Today at 11 a.m., I will personally give her a letter with special instructions, I said. It will be interesting to watch her reaction to this. While I was talking, Katie was busy making coffee. After pouring a cup, she handed it to me and replied, expressing the hope that the person in question would regain his sanity. She couldn't be so ignorant as to think that such a situation was acceptable to her, but not to me, I said, smiling grimly. I sat down at the table, admitting that this day was far from fruitful. When the clock struck 11, my mobile phone was suddenly interrupted by a call from Ruby. Because of the tears in her eyes, It was difficult for me to understand her words. "Is this really serious? Are you really thinking of divorcing me?" she asked. It was obvious that she had convinced herself that I didn't have the resolve to take any action. But I quickly and without hesitation replied that if she betrayed my trust, it would be considered treason, a violation of our agreement. We were both well aware of this fact. In search of confirmation, I asked if she would really leave me if I turned out to be unfaithful. The answer was so quiet that I almost missed it, but she managed to cough out an undeniable yes. In light of this, I suggested that we meet at home to discuss it. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I announced and quickly ended the conversation. When I got home, I decided to make coffee. The lingering aroma of bacon that she had cooked earlier in the morning filled the air, prompting me to open the kitchen window before I started eating. About 10 minutes later, she finally entered the house. When she crossed the threshold, I was already busy pouring coffee for everyone, clutching an envelope from her lawyer in one hand and a weekend bag slung over her shoulder in the other. She dropped her belongings at the entrance and stood motionless. She seemed eager to rush to me, desperate to hug me. She wasn't sure if I would give her permission, but I brought the coffee to the table and sat down, motioning for her to join me. I started the conversation by asking if she was going to go to the hotel. "I can't understand how you can ask about this after you sent me this. Without a doubt, I wasn't going to leave. I love you very much, and I want to be with you. I understood that you would not approve of this, so all plans were canceled. Now we have to decide whether our marriage needs to be fixed or whether we should go to court." While she rested her chin on her chest, I watched her closely. Leaning across the table to her, I gently lifted her chin so that our eyes met. "You will only be served if you stay at a hotel," I stressed. "No hotel, no service. Unfortunately, our marriage has gone through significant difficulties. Therefore, I have developed a plan for further action. First, you will contact Clark in my presence. I insist that you personally inform him that all arrangements are canceled for the sake of our well-being. You must deactivate and delete your personal email account. After that, you should contact your superiors, inform them about Clark's actions, and ask them to ban him from your office. After these actions, we will organize a consultation where we will figure out the reasons for your susceptibility to this situation, your faith in my law-abiding, and the necessary steps to restore trust." As soon as I finished my statement, her phone rang. It was Clark. She turned on the speakerphone so I could hear his question. "Ruby, where are you?" "I'm looking forward to seeing you at the front desk." She paused and exhaled deeply. "Alistair, I'm at home with Lou right now. Something happened that deeply affected me. If I joined you, it would ruin my marriage. I'm sorry, but the truth is that you're not worthy of sacrificing everything. That's why I'm not coming." His anger flared up with renewed vigor. "You're a stupid woman. Do you understand how much effort, time, and money I have invested in you?" Disappointed and full of anger, he ended the conversation with a sharp "go to hell," after which he abruptly hung up the phone. At that moment, Ruby finally saw him for what he really is, a disgusting slug. The task of deactivating and deleting the mailbox turned out to be difficult and took longer than expected, but in the end, everything was done within an hour. When we were finishing work, her boss and HR manager suddenly appeared at our door. "Ruby, we want to sort out today's events. It is safe to say that we are extremely disappointed, but we are ready to give you the opportunity to keep your position. Please explain the situation to us." Picking up a napkin, she gently wiped her eyes and began. "About 3 months ago, there were changes in our company, and Alistair Clark became the new sales agent for AM Metals. Before that, I was the only one responsible for maintaining the account, and he turned to me for help almost daily. At first, I didn't understand the significance of these changes. He started flirting with me, complimenting my dress, hairstyle, and even my smile. Gradually, his comments took a more inappropriate turn, focusing on my body. Unfortunately, I let his words influence my choice, as a result of which I began to wear more revealing clothes. He continued to show his interest by sending flowers and chocolates and eventually invited me to have dinner with him. Contrary to common sense, I agreed, but as a result, I found myself the object of intrusive questions about my personal life, including marriage and intimate experiences. Soon, he began to belittle my husband, claiming that he was unworthy of my companionship. His words slowly eroded my resilience, gradually eroding my spirit. In the end, he brazenly offered to spend the weekend together. Fortunately, Lou, being vigilant, slipped me a letter. In it, he announced his intention to divorce me, which brought me back to reality. I resolutely refused Alistair's invitation, informing him that my husband and I were actively working on a plan to save our marriage. I intended to contact you and officially express my complaints. So, I am glad that you are here. Woods glanced at the CEO and received a nod of acknowledgement, then turned to Ruby. Ruby, we appreciate your honesty and are glad that you are ready to admit your mistake. This was indeed a significant mistake, and you should consider yourself lucky that you are still working. Unfortunately, we constantly have problems with the quality of Ammetal's products, which led us to decide to close their account. Consequently, Clark will be permanently removed from the office. At the same time, we will not take any further action against you. At the moment, you must understand that any such violation in the future will result in immediate dismissal. Do you understand the gravity of this situation? Ruby timidly nodded her head in agreement. Indeed, they said goodbye to us and left. When they left, we started lunch, and then went in search of a consultant. Surprisingly, it turned out to be quite easy to find him. We made a phone call and successfully arranged a meeting. The consultant expressed a desire to meet with us the next day, which fell on Saturday. The time was set, and we sat looking at each other in anticipation. After about 10 seconds, I plucked up the courage and walked over to Ruby, took her hand, and led her to a comfortable bed. We shared an intimate moment together, and after that, we went to bed for the night. I dozed off with my head on her chest. When I woke up, it was already about 5 in the morning. At that moment, there was an intimate and tender bond between us, perhaps for the first time since she crossed paths with Clark. Our conversations were fruitful, and Ruby realized that Clark was manipulating her fears that our lives would become boring and mundane. She also realized that she had unknowingly provided him with all the information necessary to carry out his plan. It dawned on me that for Clark, this was all just a game, and it made me appreciate how amazing our life together had been. We didn't need anyone to guide us or teach us anything. After 3 months of consultations, our happiness lasted 4 days, and I realized that I could not forgive Ruby for being ready to enter into intimacy. A woman who truly loves her husband will not even have the thought of cheating. One day, I just didn't come home from work, and the next day, Ruby got the divorce papers. Mr. Clark had an unpleasant incident at a local mall. Going down the stairs to the parking lot, he fell heavily. The circumstances of this incident remain a mystery, although it is worth noting that at least 5 husbands at the mall had negative feelings for him that day. Coincidentally, we were all dressed in identical black suits, complete with baseball caps to ensure our anonymity. In search of solace, we gathered in the cozy atmosphere of a nearby cafe. Ruby tried to call me for a long time to convince me to break up our marriage, but I did not answer her calls and messages. We divorced pretty quickly, which pleased me. 3 years have passed since that moment, and as far as I know, after the divorce, Ruby quit her job and spent time alone, like a hunted animal. As a result, her psyche was severely damaged, and one day she got into the car, accelerated to such an extent that she could not cope with driving, and got into a terrible car accident. Ruby has been completely paralyzed for a year now. I didn't want Ruby to live out the rest of her life in this state, but she came to this life on her own. Story 2. My name is Stephen Albright, and I'm 28 years old. I am happily married and a proud father of a 2-month-old son. One of my biggest passions in life is climbing trees. I have had this love of climbing trees since childhood, despite the fact that I managed to break both my arms by falling off them. But these incidents have never dampened my enthusiasm. For me, climbing trees is a form of celebration, a way to vent emotions, a planning method, and an opportunity to feel the wind caressing my face. Rising to a height of 20 feet or more above the ground, I really take a new look at the world. On the way to school, where I teach middle school students the wonders of science, I suddenly noticed that something was wrong with my car. Deciding not to disrupt morning classes, I continued to teach until lunch and then decided to take the car to the repair shop. Unfortunately, I was informed there that the car needs a new fuel pump, which means that I will have to stay overnight. This case served as another example of the depressing practice of not keeping the necessary parts in stock until someone is ready to pay for them. The kind people from the repair shop offered to give me a ride home, where I found my wife and our precious newborn eagerly awaiting my return. Instead of going straight to the house, I felt that I needed to visit my favorite tree, which I loved climbing so much. Therefore, having landed near the mailbox, I headed my way to this familiar and cozy tree, ready to hide for a moment and find solace in its branches. Georgia wasn't expecting my early arrival, so I decided this was a great opportunity to find a quiet place. About 30 feet above the ground, I needed time to think about a decision on how to cover the cost of the fuel pump and still not charge interest on the credit card. The climb was easy, so I wasn't worried about ruining my stylish but comfortable teaching outfit. Once I was comfortable, I took a leisurely look at the breathtaking view around me. I couldn't help but appreciate the careful landscaping of our neighbor living across the street. It annoyed me that the retired neighbors have every opportunity to keep their lawns in perfect condition, while I try my best to just mow mine. Instead of removing dandelions, I view them as wildflowers or potential salad ingredients. Since there were no neighbors, I sometimes enjoy the secret of watching people without their knowledge. But my attention abruptly shifted when I noticed activity at the window of my son Jason's nursery. I watched carefully as my wife laid him down for a nap, standing over his crib with an adoring look. The peace of the moment almost brought tears to my eyes, but this feeling quickly dissipated. It took my breath away when I saw a pair of arms appear from behind my wife, wrapping around her waist. Fear instantly coursed through my veins, and I worried about her safety. But to my surprise, Georgia didn't try to defend herself. Instead, she placed her hands on the intruder's arms and tilted her head back, resting her cheek against his. It was none other than Clark Peterson, our neighbor and notorious bachelor who lived on the other side of the fence in the backyard. Clark was known as the neighborhood show-off, constantly throwing extravagant parties on the block to showcase his latest purchases. He never missed an opportunity to tell everyone about his greatness, to the scorn of all the men in the area. Clark was having a conversation about his wealth and the convenience of managing it remotely. Wanting to eavesdrop, I thought of my reliable hearing aids, budget devices for $20, which were advertised as just volume amplifiers. I use them when I watch TV at low volume so as not to disturb a sleeping child. In order not to lose them, I usually kept them in my shirt pocket. I quickly inserted the hearing aids and turned up the volume to the maximum, and now let me share with you what I heard. Do you already know who the father is? No, I don't want to find out. It could be either you or Steve. I prefer to represent you both, the man I'm in love with and the man I'm enjoying intimacy with. Do you think Steve will suspect anything? I doubt it very much. You're both similar enough that it's not obvious. I sincerely hope that he is the biological father. It gives me a strange satisfaction to realize that not only have I deceived Steve, but he is unknowingly raising my son. Let's not be cruel. Steve St. may not notice, but he will be a good father to Jason, no matter where the genetic material came from. Last year was truly the highlight of my life, and it's all thanks to you. I am happy that now we can share intimacy again. I can't help but wonder how much longer is left before the end of your maternity leave. It's only 2 more weeks. These precious minutes we've spent together lately have been just wonderful. I wish Steve and I could afford to stay at home and take care of Jason, while you take care of me. Let's not waste any more time. Shall we go to the master bedroom or the guest bedroom? Or maybe we should choose a bed this time. I still remember how the carpet burned after our last meeting on the floor. They laughed lightly before leaving the nursery. I narrowly avoided falling from a tree, but the words I heard shattered the foundations of my existence. The unwavering love and loyalty that I believed my wife possessed, as well as the child that I considered an integral part of my being, were ruthlessly destroyed. The thought of returning home was unbearable, so I climbed down from the tree and hurriedly called a taxi to the nearest bar. There was not a single customer in the bar at such an early hour, which allowed me to have the bartender's undivided attention. This happy circumstance turned out to be a blessing, as I was in desperate need of advice. The bartender, an experienced man who had undoubtedly encountered countless stories of woe, became my only confidant. He informed me that it was necessary to identify the biological father of the child whom I considered my son. I received instructions on how to do this. Then I asked how I could use the services of a divorce lawyer, he provided me with an extensive list, and I chose the most affordable option. On reflection, I came to the conclusion that none of us would be able to live on half of our total income, primarily because of the exorbitant mortgage payments on the house she insisted on. In addition, he limited my excessive alcohol consumption, emphasizing the importance of making decisions with a clear mind in the upcoming crucial moments. The following days were filled with anxiety. Georgia felt my anxiety, and I tried to calm her down by explaining that this is a common occurrence for high school teachers. In addition, I mentioned our financial difficulties, since the cost of having a son was added to the need to replace the fuel pump. Surprisingly, she seemed to accept my excuses, but a few days later, I received results that showed that I was not the biological father. 15 minutes later, I was dialing the number of the inexpensive lawyer I had chosen earlier. In a conversation with a lawyer, I did not immediately realize that I was in a desperate situation. In the event of a divorce, she would have been entitled to a house, alimony, and some kind of household help. The reason our mortgage was significant was that she insisted on buying a specific house. For my part, I needed to pay off a significant student loan. If I cannot provide proof that I am the real father, child support can still be assigned. Unfortunately, the conversation that I overheard, although it was not recorded, would have no weight in court. Dividing our limited savings wouldn't make much difference. All she had to do was move in with her lover without sacrificing her current lifestyle. Meanwhile, I had to work the night shift delivering pizza. My job as a teacher hung in the balance and largely depended on whether I could avoid any mishaps. The reason for this uncertainty was that my wife's father held the prominent position of district superintendent. Known for his strictness and brusqueness, he was reputed to be an administrator who worked according to the rules. Spending time with him, I understood his unshakable confidence that his daughter had absorbed the values and life lessons that he and his wife had instilled in her. Among these principles were loyalty and responsibility. I assumed he would vehemently dispute any allegations of misconduct on her part, but it remained unknown whether he would give preference to concrete evidence rather than the instinctive desire of a father to protect his precious daughter. Once again, I found myself pouring out my innermost thoughts to my bartender's sympathetic ear. This time, however, because of the noisy crowd, I had to wait patiently for his breaks between serving drinks. In order to trust him, he suggested that I find solace in Georgia's company, but in the end advised me to completely distance myself from the situation. Let her lover and the father of her child take responsibility for her, I was told. If she wants to get a divorce, let her pay the lawyer's expenses herself. Armed with determination, I was ready for a confrontation with Georgia. Choosing the right moment when Jason was sleeping peacefully, I approached her, emphasizing the urgency of our conversation. She seemed to suspect that she had been discovered. When we sat down at the kitchen table, tears welled up in her eyes. I am aware of your relationship with Clark and the length of your engagement. Besides, I know that Jason is not my biological child, but this is not the final information. Even I'm not sure about that. Let me be clear, Clark is just not my son. I'm just assuming that he's the only plausible option, although I wouldn't be surprised if there are other possibilities. Please understand, I'm not promiscuous. Clark is the only acceptable alternative. And why are you so sure that you are not the father? I handed her the document, and she began to read it. The document clearly states that the DNA from sample A does not match the DNA from sample B. I'm sample A, and the person I call sample B is Jason. I understand that you may have doubts about this, but I'm ready to undergo additional testing to prove my case. Even if it's true, you're listed as the father on the birth certificate. I'd like to know what your plans are. Maybe you are considering marriage counseling or a trial separation. It is clear that you do not want a divorce because of its financial consequences, but my decision is not influenced by any of these options. I just made the decision to leave. I will look for a job elsewhere, and you can count on the support of your lover and Jason's father. I have the opportunity to sue Clark to get alimony, but it will also mean acknowledging my involvement in the upbringing of his son. But I don't want to have anything to do with you, Jason, or Clark. If you want to get divorced, you have to initiate this process yourself. Goodbye. I got up to leave. Stay a minute, we still have important issues to discuss. You can't just run away from your family like we're expendable consumables. It seemed to me that you considered me expendable. You replaced me in your bed and as the father of your child. Now you can see how good my replacement is. I left and managed to find an inexpensive motel room, sending my resume to school districts in different states. I continued to teach every day with the constant fear of being fired. In the end, I was unexpectedly called by the superintendent, a situation that would have horrified most people, but personally, I had nothing to lose. The manager questioned my actions, accusing me of shirking my duties as a husband and father. He saw me as a son and expressed his disappointment with my choice. I explained that my decision was dictated by the fact that I could no longer tolerate my wife being shared with her lover, who is the biological father of her son. I find it hard to believe my daughter would never behave like that. Can you provide any evidence to support your claim, sir? In my eyes, you are an exceptionally honest man. I believe that you are able to recognize the truth even if it contradicts your previous beliefs. I have a doctor's report that proves conclusively that I am not Jason's biological father. I have concrete evidence. Can I show you these documents to study? His stern expression softened slightly, and there was a hint of relaxation in it. What evidence do you have that she has a lover who may or may not be Jason's father? I was perched in a tree near Jason's room while you were elsewhere. Most likely, you didn't know about my addiction to climbing trees. For various reasons, I find solace in sitting on them. That day, when I was trying to recover from an unexpected car repair, I noticed Georgia and our neighbor talking in the nursery. Thanks to the amplifying hearing aids in my ears, I could both see and hear their communication. It was undeniable that they had a long-standing affair. It's incredibly hard for me to imagine that this is about my own daughter. I found it very difficult to believe in it myself. I was completely in the dark. I loved her with all my soul. Wait, you said loved, so you're saying you don't love her anymore? I can't say that. It's not easy to give up the deep love I once had for her and Jason. Every day, the harsh reality of the situation steadily erodes my affection for her. Have you thought about discussing this with her? Contacting a psychologist can be a useful option. The main problem I'm struggling with is that I can't forget the fact that she cheated on me for a whole year. This means that every time she confessed her love to me during this period, it was a lie. I also can't forget the fact that she had a child with her lover and expected me to raise him as my own. If Jason were biologically mine, I might consider staying and trying to repair the relationship if she ended her affair. Besides, the fact that she plans to continue her illicit relationship is hard for me to overlook. Therefore, I believe that consultations are useless in this situation. I consider the divorce unfavorable for myself, primarily because I will be obliged to provide financial support to my partner regardless of her infidelity and uncertainty about Jason's parental rights. Interestingly, she can really benefit financially if her lover takes responsibility for her and their child. Moreover, she will be able to engage in a personal life that is clearly more valuable to her than our own. In order to rebuild my life, it seems to me necessary to start all over again in another place. I apologize for the stress this situation will cause you and your wife. None of us deserve the actions she committed. What are your immediate plans for the future? I recently sent my resume to schools located in different states, as I know about the high demand for male high school science teachers. But the success of my applications ultimately depends on your recommendation. Your feedback can significantly affect my chances, and I trust your honesty that you will give an accurate idea of my qualifications before making any decisions about a possible change in my career. I ask you to check the information I have provided. I believe that I will be able to receive such confirmation as soon as possible because I have always been able to rely on George's honesty when faced with similar situations. I'll contact you again as soon as I gather the necessary information. Thanks for the help, sir. Georgia would rather feel the burning pain of stepping barefoot on hot coals than engage in conversation with her father at this moment. Not knowing what her father knows, she has a deep fear that he may know or suspect her of not being completely honest about my departure. Just the thought of her father talking to me makes her tremble. "Hi, Dad," she says, forcing a forced cheerfulness. "Please come inside." She offers him to take his grandson in his arms, but he refused and asked to put the child in the playpen to create a favorable environment for their conversation. His serious tone further increases her anxiety. "You're talking very seriously," she remarks, concern in her voice. I know that you and Steve are going through some difficulties right now, but I am convinced that he will return." Perplexed, she asked, "What do you want to discuss?" "I have a cotton swab with me. Do you understand its purpose?" Anxiety overwhelmed her. "You want to confirm whether Steve is the biological father. What is the reason for this? You can be honest with me now and save me the trouble." She realized that it was unwise to lie. At that moment, the truth is I really don't know, and I don't see anything special about it. My God, are you unable to understand? You just admitted the possibility that the child might not belong to your husband but to someone else. How many possible options are there, Dad? I'm not promiscuous, there is only one alternative. If you enter into an intimate relationship with someone other than your husband, it can be perceived as promiscuity, regardless of the number of participants. Have you ever thought about discussing the issue of divorce if you have feelings for another man, so you could wait until the divorce to start a family? Personally, I don't have romantic feelings for Clark, but he satisfies certain physical needs that Steve doesn't have. I still love Steve, and I want to continue building a life with him. There's no need to rush the kids, so I don't understand why Steve is so upset. Clark and I have been in an intimate relationship for almost a year now, and surprisingly Steve has never expressed dissatisfaction with our closeness. As soon as he finds out about this, he will return home to my son and me. I'm even ready to end my relationship with Clark if Steve insists. What happened to the daughter I raised? I find it hard to believe that you can say such words. It's worth noting that open marriages are becoming more common nowadays, Dad. Steve needs to understand that one of the partners may not be able to meet all the needs of the other. Maybe I should have discussed this with Steve before talking to Clark. Anyway, that doesn't justify Steve's decision to divorce me. We have absolutely no reason to continue this conversation. It's obvious that you've lost touch with reality. Let me be clear, your mother and I are supporting Steve in this situation. Unfortunately, we can't support you or your child until you fix the situation. We are sure that you perfectly understand the difference between good and evil because we have instilled these values in you. Also, please refuse to return to teaching as your job has been terminated. It is important to note that these actions are a violation of the contract, and I am ready to sue you. Moreover, I am even ready to make public the true reason for your dismissal without fear of possible inconvenience. Now I have a stronger sense of good and evil. I would rather resign as superintendent than support a man who commits adultery." He left her in tears. "My husband left me, and my father disowned me. I desperately needed someone to lean on. Clark, could you come over? I need you to be by my side. Is Steve with you?" "No, he dumped me. My dad just ran out, yelling at me. Please come soon, I need your support." "I'm on my way, my love." 2 minutes later, he appeared on her doorstep and went inside. "Oh, Clark." Steve left and said he was planning to run away. Moreover, my father fired me from my job and said that he and my mother would no longer support me. You're the only person I have left. What should we do?" Clark was silent for a moment. "Don't worry, my dear. Everything will work out as well as possible. Now we don't have to hide our love anymore. I can turn obstacles into opportunities, and yes, I will be helping you with Jason. After all, he is our son. I am grateful that we have him. It gives me great joy to be able to take care of both of you. So, what's our next step? You need to initiate a divorce with Steve to get married. We need to think about which house to live in. It will probably be easier for everyone if I move in with you so that you and Jason don't have to deal with the hassle of moving. I will try to put my current house up for sale soon so that we are ready. I should also start looking for a new job since teaching in this area is no longer suitable. But don't worry about the job, I have enough money to support us. You can focus on raising our son and maybe even think about adding another brother or sister to him. I can't tell you how grateful I am for your continued support, Clark. You're really amazing, and it makes me feel a lot calmer. There seems to be a deeper connection between us than just desire. Let's go to your bedroom and celebrate this moment." After Clark left and Jason dozed off, she found an alternative way to celebrate the occasion. "I wasn't a drinker, but when I indulged myself, I preferred the best spirits. I came across Casey Jones Distillery and bought their first-class bourbon. Unfortunately for me, I forgot it at home. Fortunately for her, luck was on her side. She was slightly intoxicated. She had not consumed strong alcoholic beverages for a long time. Unable to resist the urge, she couldn't help but proclaim her newfound luck. She turned to me first and then to her father. I'm agreeing to an early divorce to make it easier for Clark and me to tie the knot. Any financial assistance in the form of spousal support or child support does not matter. My future husband will be happy to buy out Steve's share of the house. I don't need any damn money from my future ex-husband or a job from my tough dad. This phone call took me by surprise. I assumed she would deny Clark's paternity. Now I realize that I crossed the line by letting her be with someone else while I'm raising someone else's child. It became clear to me that she intended to hire a lawyer and conclude a civil divorce agreement that would not completely ruin me financially. This made me reconsider the possibility that I wouldn't have to move out of state, especially if Georgia was no longer pursuing a teaching career. I decided to talk to Georgia's father, who, like me, got a call about a similar matter. Naturally, he was upset by his daughter's act and worried that he might lose the opportunity to see his grandchildren, at least in the foreseeable future. He had conflicting emotions about the financial stability of his daughter and grandson. He was relieved that they would not experience any financial difficulties, but at the same time, he wanted his daughter to suffer more serious consequences for her misdeeds. Georgia couldn't remember a time when she was happier. Clark began to visit her regularly, dividing his time between work and his home office. Although their intimate encounters lost some of the initial buzz when they had to be careful, the passion was still amazing. Clark even decided to sell his house. He continued to have difficulties with fatherhood, which I attributed to his long-term bachelor life. It seemed impossible for him to cope with such a simple task as changing a dirty diaper. And so, I was handed the legal documents. The process went faster now, and in less than 3 months, she officially became Mrs. Clark Peterson. The next step will be to change Jason's birth certificate, in which Clark will be listed as his father. Then Jason will not be able to remember the time when Clark was not his father in every sense. When thoughts of Clark's promised honeymoon in the tropics filled her mind, I reluctantly admitted that I was a worthy husband. After feeling 2 months of pure bliss, she decided to invite Clark to dinner as soon as he had a free minute. Knowing that his favorite dish was an Italian creation with shrimp and scallops, she eagerly cooked it. But when she tried to call him, his phone suddenly went to voicemail. When it was time for lunch, she decided to pick up Jason and visit Clark. To her surprise, there were no signs of activity in the house. There were no lights around. But then the newly installed for sale sign proudly displayed on the lawn in front of the house appeared to her eyes. Curiosity got the better of her, and she looked through one of the windows and found an empty living room devoid of any furniture. Her mind raced wildly in search of an alternative explanation to refute the obvious truth. He may have temporarily moved into a hotel room before the wedding, planning to move in with me later. In preparation for this, he sent all his furniture to be cleaned and was supposed to arrive tonight, ready to move into my house. He even sold all his furniture because he thought he wouldn't need it in my house. She and Jason returned home, eagerly awaiting Clark's arrival to assure themselves that her fears were unfounded. She made a lot of calls and left a few messages, but he never came to dinner with them. He did not show up for the usual bedtime dinner, which he had been strictly following for the past 2 months. When she tried to contact him, she found that his mailbox was full and he was not answering any of her calls. Panic seized her as it became clear that she did not know about his family or about other acquaintances who could be contacted. In a desperate attempt, she managed to find at least some information from the state police and local hospitals. Eventually, it dawned on her that she needed to contact his realtor. To her surprise, she found out that he had sold his house a few days ago. Believing that Clark had already moved out of state, it became clear that she didn't have enough time to figure out the situation. Still, she kept persistently dialing Clark's number, hoping for an answer. She was at a loss when he finally answered. "Thank God I got through to you. Where are you? What happened? Are you all right? Wow, you're definitely persistent. I wasn't very interested in talking to you, but you never give up. I disappeared in a direction unknown to you, and I'm not going back. I decided to stay alone, and I have to admit that I was not the most responsible father. Besides Jason, there are 2 other children, and I seem to have only sons anyway. Maybe you can try to convince Steve to come back. If he's as ignorant as you described, then maybe he'll buy it. But what about all the promises we made to each other, to live together, get married, and raise our son as a family? It's depressing that you say such things without having the slightest intention of doing them. To tell you the truth, I only made these promises so that everything would go on until I took care of everything else before leaving. Although you may lack common sense, I have to admit that you are an attractive person, and I will miss that. Is this some kind of nonsense to find out if I'm going to beg you to come back and do the right thing? If that's the case, then consider it my plea. I really need you, and I do not know how I will do without you. But honestly, honey, I have to move on. Unfortunately, it's time for me to leave. Let's not stay in touch. She looked at herself in the mirror, feeling annoyed. You're a stupid, disrespectful person. The only company she had was a spider in her web. She had no one to turn to. All the friends were friends with Steve, taking his side as he was nearing the end of his marriage because of her infidelity. My parents would probably say it was my fault. Perhaps they will offer help, as they would for any person in a difficult situation. Calling someone was too embarrassing for me, especially considering how I used to disrespect those who once cherished me. Fortunately, Jason's love and his dependence on me gave me the strength to continue living. But her worries were not limited to that. The burden of mortgage payments, utility bills, home and car insurance, and groceries eventually caught up with her. To make ends meet, she applied for food stamps and Social Security benefits. She found solace in the walls of her house, where she spent her days watching old DVDs. Having long ago given up cable television, she started the path to weight loss. When my appetite did not disappear, depriving me of any motivation to eat, among the wreckage of her life, Jason became the only source of fleeting happiness. When she came to in a sterile hospital room, the bright light and the smell of antiseptics engulfed me. The first word that came out of her mouth was Jason, then it became known that his grandparents had sheltered him. A wave of relief washed over her, but at the same time, it painfully illuminated the depths into which she had sunk. Her own well-being no longer mattered as long as Jason was in safe hands. She was ready to say goodbye to this world. In due course, a representative of the Child Protection Service entered her room, which was the signal for the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She handed her a court order according to which the son must be placed in foster care until she proves that she can become a mother again. Her demeanor was surprisingly strict, leaving no room for reassuring words or encouragement. Later, her parents arrived, taking Jason with them. According to the rules of the system, family members had priority in providing a home for children in care, mainly because of the cost-effectiveness compared to hiring foster parents. Jason, stunned by the unfamiliar sights, sounds, and smells of the hospital room, snuggled up to her mother and categorically refused to let her hold him. She hoped that when he grew up, he would not remember this incident. She was assured that everything was fine and that she should focus only on recovery, but she didn't have the motivation to do it. When I unexpectedly visited her, tears welled up in my eyes, which almost made me break down, but I managed to survive. Georgia, I don't dwell on the past anymore. I'm moving forward. So why are you still here? Well, I still love you and sincerely want to watch your recovery in progress. Jason needs you to be his mother, especially now that he has your mother he can rely on. I feel like no one needs me anymore. Please just go away and give me my freedom. Suddenly, an attractive young woman appeared, and comfortingly putting her arm around my waist, led me out of the room. He found someone else to live with. It was a positive outcome for him but devastating for me, she thought, shedding tears. She woke up in a room resembling a hospital room, although there were no machines or IVs. Dressed in a modest dress so simple that even a poor girl would reject, she slowly realized that she was in a psychiatric clinic. Here she will be provided with the necessary care, ensuring that she will not be able to endanger her life or the lives of others. Perhaps it was for the best. Therapists tirelessly pushed her to take more responsibility for her actions, and it made her want to scream. She was out of her mind, and now she was suffering the consequences. All she wanted was to be left alone, but they refused to give her that kind of respite. Her parents came to visit, but fortunately, they did not take Jason with them. The only thing that mattered to her was taking care of him. All she wanted was for him not to become like his mother. The funeral was simple, attended by only a handful of people. It was very hard to see Jason so devastated. He snuggled up to my wife, who coincidentally was his kindergarten teacher last year. I suspect that my ex-father-in-law played a role in our meeting. Lately, he has begun to make not too subtle hints that he cannot keep up with the energetic boy. My wife stands next to Jason, holding his hand, and we spend more and more time with him. I see how George's positive qualities are reflected in him. I have a very good idea of what all this will lead to, and I am genuinely optimistic. It looks like our unborn child is going to have an older brother soon. It seems to me that this is the right decision,